Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013. In the previous section we started looking at formulas and functions, and I gave you a brief overview of the main features. In this section we're going to concentrate on how formulas work, and we're also going to look at cell references, ranges and names. Now first of all I want to look at cell references. You may recall from the previous section that we can put together a little formula to do calculations. For example, on this particular sheet that I'm using, I'm doing some estimation on the refurbishments of a house. And the first thing I've got is a list of the dimensions of the rooms in the house. So for each of the rooms I've got the length in feet, the width in feet and the height in feet. Now it's a pretty straightforward job to multiply the length by the width to get the floor area. And the formula there would be, if I click in that cell D4, the formula would be equals, and then it would be B4 asterisk, asterisk is the multiplication symbol, C4. If I tick, I get an area of that room in square feet. Now, as I also pointed out, if I select down, now you should know where to find the fill down command on the Home tab in the Cells group, but in fact there's a keyboard shortcut which is Control D to fill down. And what actually happens, as we saw in the previous section, is that in each of these other cells we get a different version of the formula. So if you look at the formula bar as I click through the cells, you can see how they change. Now there is another very important way of being able to reference cells. And another important way is to use what are called absolute references. Now if I use an absolute reference, the reference does not change if I fill or copy and paste a particular formula. Let me show you how this works. Let's suppose that mistakenly in this formula, instead of putting B4 times C4, what I put was this: $B $4 times C4. Now the dollar, what it effectively is, it makes this an absolute reference. It says that this formula is definitely B4. If I fill or copy and paste, it will still be B4. Let me tick that. Obviously I get the same answer on the first one. Watch what happens now when I fill down. So select those other fields, press Control D. Now in fact the answers are all wrong now except for the first one, but if I look on the second one, the living room one, look at what the formula is. It's $B $4 times C5. The B4 part, if I make it an absolute reference, does not change. Now clearly in this case that's wrong, and that's not what I want at all, but that's to demonstrate the effect of using what are called absolute references. Now we're going to come back to using absolute references a little bit later on in this section, but I want to show you something now which is slightly off the track of what we're doing but quite important, and that is to talk about an old way of referencing cells in workbooks. This was the early method that was used, very early versions of Excel, but sometimes this does still surface and you will still see it mentioned sometimes, partly because certain things you do in Excel need this other way of referencing cells. Now we're not going to need it, but I just want to point it out to you because you may come across it. Now in order to demonstrate this to you, I'm going to leave everything else on this sheet the same, but I'm going to go into Backstage View to look at the options, and then I'm going to click on Formulas. Now one of the options within formulas under working with formulas, if I just show you the screen tip there, is R1C1's reference style. Change the way Excel formulas refer to cells. Instead of using letters for columns and numbers for rows, this option enables using numbers for both rows and columns. Cells are then referenced in the format R1C1. Let me just check that and click on OK. Look at that formula there, and I know this formula is wrong, but it doesn't really matter. What this now says is R4C2 row 4 column 2. This is how these used to be referenced. Row 4 column 2, and then the next one is row column and then in brackets -1. Now this is where it gets a little bit confusing. The cell I'm trying to reference here is that one. It's actually in the 3rd column and the 5th row, but the way that the old system referenced it was to say it's in the same row as me. Remember, we're looking at the formula here for the living room area. Same row, but the column is one less. So when you're looking at a formula in this cell, the one I'm hovering over here, the living room floor area cell, and the formula says RC -1, it means same row, one less column. So same row, one less column is the width. If you reference something somewhere else, it gives the row number and the column number. Now, actually some spreadsheet type products still use that approach, and it was the traditional approach, and in some ways I find it preferable to the approach of using letter numbers for columns and numbers for rows. But letter numbers for columns and numbers for rows is the most popular way now. That's normally how we work. You may well come across that, but we certainly aren't likely to need it during the rest of this course. So I've changed the referencing system from the R1C1 system, as it's called, back to the conventional one now, and everything's the same as it was on this spreadsheet. I'm also going to now correct this formula here. So instead of saying $B, $4, the absolute references, I'm going to use B4 times C4, tick, fill down, Control D, and I now have all my floor areas correct again. Now the next thing I want to do is to fill in the wall areas for the rooms. Now so far we've dealt with a couple of very simple calculations, just a couple of multiplications really, and a bit of addition and subtraction in the previous section. But as things get more complex, we're going to come across the problem you will have come across at school, which is that sometimes you have to make it clear exactly what order a calculation has to be performed in. And with the case of the area of the floor, the calculation we did just now, area of floor is length times width, that's simple. If I click on A16, it actually emphasizes that we've got a more complex calculation here, because to find the area of the walls of a room, you basically say, if I look at one of the long walls, its area is length times height. I'm assuming here that these rooms are rectangular, so I'll have two long walls, length times height twice, and then I'll have two short walls, width times height twice. So I've got to work out the length times the height, double that, and the width times the height, double that, and add those two figures together. Now, as with the similar calculations that you will have done at school, I'm sure, the key here is to understand operator precedence. So that's the sequence in which Excel does its calculations, and fortunately for us, the operator precedence follows exactly the standard that you would expect. And in any case, you can use brackets, braces, exactly as you will have used at school as well, I'm sure, to make sure that the calculation is done in the correct order. So what I'm going to do here is to work out what that formula is for the wall area, first of all, of the dining room. Now, one important thing here is to just bear in mind that using the formula bar is a great way of entering in this case, because you can start to type in what you think you need, and then you can work on that until you're pretty sure it's right. So I know it's a formula, so I'm going to put an equal sign in to start. Let's suppose that I just wanted the area of a long wall. Now the length of the room is 15, the width is 21, the height is 9. So if I go for the length of the room as 15, the area would be 15 asterisk 9. Now the 15, 9, the length is actually B4. So I really want B4 there, and the 9, the height, is E4. And if I wanted to play really safe now, I could say, well, I want 2 of those, so I want 2 times, and then you might be inclined to put those in brackets like that. Now, in fact, in this case, as I'm sure if you've got any kind of ability with arithmetic at all, you realize those brackets are unnecessary. But sometimes putting the brackets in helps you think, even if you take them out again later. So, for the length of the room, the equivalent wall area is B4 times E4, and I want 2 of those. Now I need to add to that, so that's the plus symbol, 2, I know it's going to follow the same pattern, and this is going to be width, which is C4 times, and again the height's the same, so that'll be E4 as well. So I reckon that formula is correct. So I want 2 of B4 E4 plus 2 of C4 E4. Let's see what that gives me if I enter that. So what it's given me here is an error message, and it says we found a typo in your formula and tried to correct it too. Now look at what it suggested as the correcting. You look at the formula bar and you'll see the mistake that I made. I left out the asterisk after the 2. In school you probably will have written this formula, you wouldn't have needed to put an asterisk with the brackets there. In Excel you do. None of the operators really are assumed. The operators, asterisk is the one you use for multiplication, plus for addition, minus for subtraction. The slash symbol is the division, and then for exponentiation, raising to a power, we use the up arrow character, but we'll look at more of that a little bit later on. So if I miss out an operator, Excel will flag that as an error. It will very often make a suggestion about correcting it, and I look at that and I say, oh yeah, I see what I've done wrong, I forgot the asterisk after the 2. Do you want to accept this correction? Yes, I will. Now of course sometimes it will suggest a correction which isn't a correction at all, and I'd say no and correct it to what it should be, but on this occasion it's got it absolutely right for me, so click on yes, and I've got a wall area for that room of 648 square feet. Now it would take a very long time for me to go through all of the operators and other aspects of formulas in Excel. We are going to continue with formulas in the next section, and we're going to use some functions as well. But for a much more detailed account of formulas, including things like what all the operators are and information about precedence and so on, this is one of those areas where if you do a search on the Excel help and search on the term operators, you'll get this very useful overview section, and within the overview section, if I scroll right down there with an explanation of this, you'll get a list of all of the arithmetic operators, and then things like comparison operators, we'll be looking at those later on, text operators, reference operators, a lot more information about operators than I can cover in detail in this course. So that's a good source for further information. So let's go back to our spreadsheet here. I'm going to do a fill down and then Control D. And of course if I look at, say, the family room, the last room in the list, look at the formula, it's 2 times B12 times E12 plus 2 times C12 times E12 to give the total wall area of that room. And of course by now if I said to you, give me the total wall area for the house, we can go down there, go beyond the bottom one there, use the sigma up on the ribbon to give us a total 5,268 square feet, and we could even put something in here, maybe do a merge using this button here, merge and center, and put in there total, and there we are. We've got a total wall area for the house of 5,268 square feet. Okay, so in this section we've looked at formulas, we've looked at a more complicated formula, some information about cell references and so on. Now we're going to turn our attention to the floors of this house, and we're going to try to work out what it's going to cost to carpet this house. I'll see you in the next section.